It all started on what should have been a quiet, ordinary Thursday evening in our suburban neighborhood, a place where picket fences, neatly trimmed lawns, and rows of identical houses gave the illusion of order, peace, and community. For anyone driving by, it looked like the perfect American dream. But behind that facade, tension simmered, fueled by one woman who had taken it upon herself to enforce her own brand of law and order. Karen, the infamous law enforcer whose name had become a whispered warning among residents. I had moved to this neighborhood 3 years earlier with my 12-year-old daughter, Emily. Emily was my world, my heartbeat, my joy. She was a bright, loving child with a passion for art and music, but she also had cerebral palsy, which affected her mobility and balance. Every decision I made revolved around keeping her safe, nurturing her growth, and shielding her from the cruelty of the world, both large and small. Little did I know that one ordinary evening, the very person entrusted with maintaining community standards would become a threat to her safety. Emily and I were sitting on our back porch, enjoying the warm spring breeze. She had just finished her therapy exercises, which left her arms slightly fatigued but her face glowing with pride. I was helping her sketch a small landscape in her notebook, a scene of rolling hills, blooming flowers, and a bright sun, which contrasted sharply with the tension creeping into our lives unbeknownst to us. For a few moments, all felt right in the world. Then, from across the street, I noticed movement. Karen, her figure appeared near the edge of our property line, clipboard in hand, her posture rigid and purposeful. I immediately felt that familiar, sinking dread, the kind you get when you know confrontation is inevitable. Karen had a reputation that preceded her. She was notorious in the neighborhood for her relentless policing of lawns, mailboxes, and fences. She was feared by residents, not for her authority but for the intensity with which she wielded it. Most of the time, I could avoid her, but that evening, she had set her sights on me and my family. Without warning, Karen stormed across the street, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, her expression twisted into one of righteous indignation. She began barking orders immediately, pointing her clipboard at our newly planted flower bed, which she claimed was improperly positioned by exact inches. She criticized our mailbox, which leaned a tiny fraction to the left, declaring it a violation of the HOA code. Her tone was sharp, accusatory, and deliberately intimidating. I tried to reason with her calmly, hoping to de-escalate the situation. "Karen," I said, my voice firm but polite, "I'll make the adjustments over the weekend. There's no need for a confrontation right now." Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, jabbing her clipboard as though it were a weapon. "Excuses are unacceptable," she snapped. "You think you can just ignore the rules? Your negligence affects the entire community." Emily, sensing the tension, instinctively moved closer to me. I put my arm around her small shoulders, silently promising protection. But Karen was relentless. Her focus shifted to Emily, and in her twisted logic, my child, my defenseless, disabled daughter, became fair game in her display of authority. Without any hesitation, Karen jabbed the corner of her clipboard directly at Emily's arm. The impact left a red mark on her delicate skin, and she cried out in pain, a raw, piercing sound that made my blood run cold. Rage surged through me, and I instinctively stepped between them, shielding Emily. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I shouted, my voice trembling with anger. "She's a child with a disability. How dare you touch her?" Instead of remorse, Karen responded with a cold, high-pitched laugh. "This is what happens when people ignore the rules," she said, her tone cruel and unyielding. "Maybe next time, you'll think twice before breaking community standards." Her words were venomous, calculated to intimidate and belittle, and I realized in that moment that Karen wasn't just a bully. She was someone who took pleasure in exercising power over those she perceived as weaker. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some neighbors whispered nervously to each other, while others watched silently, seemingly afraid to intervene. Karen thrived on this type of public spectacle, using it to assert dominance and maintain the illusion of moral authority. She accused me of creating a scene, and threatened to call the police if I did not comply with her demands. But I knew the truth. The aggressor in this situation was her, and I had to protect Emily. I quickly pulled out my phone and began recording. I captured every movement, every word, every malicious glance. This footage would be our evidence, a crucial lifeline if we were to defend ourselves against her unpredictable behavior. Karen eventually left, muttering about fines and community accountability, but the damage had already been done. That night, as I cleaned the small red mark on Emily's arm, I felt a profound mix of anger, fear, and determination. I held her close, whispering reassurances while silently vowing that no one would ever harm her again without consequence. The days that followed revealed just how calculated Karen's behavior truly was. I reached out to the HOA board to report the incident, hoping for intervention or at least acknowledgement of her misconduct. The responses I received were frustratingly vague, defensive, and evasive. They suggested that I attempt mediation with Karen, a proposal that was absurd, considering she had physically harmed my daughter. It became clear that the HOA was more concerned with protecting their enforcer than ensuring the safety of residents. I also filed a police report, fully aware that cases like this often face delays or dismissal without compelling evidence. But with the video recording, I had something undeniable. Karen had overstepped every boundary, and now, the truth was in my hands. Even as I tried to focus on recovery and normalcy, the lingering dread was suffocating. Karen had not only attacked Emily physically, she had attacked our sense of safety, our trust in our community, and our belief that our home was a sanctuary. It was a violation that went far beyond a minor HOA dispute. It was a targeted assault against a vulnerable child, a direct challenge to any notion of justice or decency. By the end of the week, I realized the full scope of the danger we faced. Karen wasn't just a bully, she was someone willing to weaponize the HOA's authority against anyone she chose. And I knew, deep in my heart, that this confrontation was only the beginning. What had started as a minor property dispute had now escalated into a personal and potentially legal battle, one that would test every ounce of strength, courage, and resilience that I possessed. As I tucked Emily into bed that night, I promised her one thing. That no matter what Karen tried, no matter the intimidation, no matter the fear, I would stand between her and harm. I would fight, and I would protect her with everything I had. Little did I know just how high the stakes would climb in the days to come, and just how far Karen was willing to go to maintain her twisted sense of control over our lives. I thought reporting Karen to the HOA and filing a police report would be enough to protect Emily, but in the twisted logic of a person like Karen, victims often become villains in her mind. Just 1 week after the incident on our porch, a thick, official-looking envelope arrived in our mailbox. My hands trembled as I saw the county court seal and realized that this wasn't just bureaucracy, it was Karen striking back. Inside was a notice that left me in stunned disbelief. Karen had filed a civil lawsuit against me for emotional distress and defamation of character. According to her, my complaints to the HOA, my calls to neighbors, and the video I had recorded were supposedly damaging her reputation and causing her personal suffering. I read the words over and over, my chest tightening with disbelief. The absurdity of it was almost surreal. How could she, someone who had struck my disabled child, portray herself as the victim while claiming I was the aggressor? But this was Karen's world. She thrived on controlling narratives, twisting events, and intimidating anyone who dared challenge her authority. She believed that filing a lawsuit would intimidate me, silence me, and ultimately protect her reputation. She thought that by using the court system as a weapon, she could continue her pattern of bullying unopposed. But she hadn't reckoned on my determination to fight back, not just for myself, but for Emily. I immediately contacted a lawyer who specialized in civil harassment, disability rights, and HOA disputes. Our first consultation was intense. The attorney listened carefully as I recounted every detail of Karen's actions, the confrontation on our porch, the strike to Emily's arm, her pattern of harassment toward neighbors, and the way she wielded her HOA authority as a weapon. After I finished, the attorney nodded gravely. "This is a classic SLAPP suit," they said. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. Karen's filing is not about justice, it's about intimidation. She's trying to silence you and make you feel powerless. I felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief because there was a path forward, but dread because I knew what this meant. Months of legal battles, stress, and more confrontations with someone who was both relentless and unhinged. I had to be meticulous. Every document, every witness, every medical note would need to be perfect. I couldn't afford to make a single mistake. Over the next several days, my life transformed. Between work, Emily's therapy sessions, and countless hours of legal preparation, I barely slept. I collected medical reports documenting Emily's injury from the clipboard strike. I asked our neighbors to provide written statements about the incident, many of whom reluctantly admitted they were intimidated by Karen but had witnessed parts of what happened. I even gathered evidence of Karen's long history of harassment within the HOA, arbitrary fines, aggressive confrontations, and threats aimed at other families. Every piece of evidence felt like a small victory, but I knew the fight was just beginning. Karen's lawsuit aimed to paint me as unstable, as an overreacting mother seeking to tarnish her reputation. She wanted the narrative to be that I was the one causing harm, that Emily's tears were a product of my supposed hysteria rather than Karen's aggression. The audacity of it fueled my anger, but also my resolve. The pre-trial hearing was nerve-wracking. The courtroom was stark and formal, a place where tension hung in the air like a thick fog. When Karen arrived, she looked every bit the picture of composure, sharp blazer, perfectly coiffed hair, and a smug expression that screamed confidence. But beneath that exterior, I could sense a flicker of unease. She had built her reputation on intimidation, but here she was, facing someone unwilling to be cowed. Our attorney opened with a clear, concise statement. This case is about more than a minor HOA dispute. It is about the protection of a vulnerable child, the accountability of authority figures, and the principle that no individual, regardless of position, can abuse power without consequences. They presented the video footage of Karen striking Emily. The courtroom went silent as Emily's small arm flinched under the corner of the clipboard. The audio captured her cry, a sound that pierced the quiet and lingered in the room. Karen's composure faltered slightly, and I could see her searching for allies among her witnesses, who avoided her gaze. Karen attempted to justify her actions. She claimed that Emily had provoked her, that she was enforcing community rules, and that I had somehow orchestrated the incident for attention. Each word she spoke was like a dagger twisting the narrative, but our evidence was solid. Every detail of her behavior, every witness statement, and the video clearly contradicted her claims. The courtroom was beginning to see the pattern. Karen's bullying wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a repeated, deliberate tactic designed to intimidate residents. Meanwhile, I prepared Emily for what to expect. I knew she would need to testify, and though she was only 12 and had her own vulnerabilities, she was brave and resilient. We practiced calmly explaining what had happened, focusing on honesty and clarity. I reminded her that the court was a place where the truth mattered, and that she had the right to stand up for herself. Watching her courage grow over those days was inspiring, even in the face of our anxiety. We also dug deeper into Karen's history. I discovered multiple incidents where she had harassed residents over trivial violations. A mailbox that wasn't perfectly aligned, a lawn that wasn't perfectly manicured, even minor decorative choices. Emails, fines, and letters piled up, an indisputable record of her obsession with control. Each document we compiled made it clearer that Karen's lawsuit against us was less about alleged defamation and more about intimidation and retribution. Then came the breakthrough moment. One of Karen's own neighbors, who had initially sided with her, admitted in a deposition that they had seen Karen strike Emily. This revelation shifted the dynamic dramatically. It was not only evidence against her claims but also a public acknowledgement of her aggression. The narrative was turning in our favor. I could see that the community's perception of Karen was beginning to fracture. Her aura of authority, so carefully constructed over years of intimidation, was crumbling. As the trial date approached, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. The weeks had been exhausting, legal prep, therapy, documentation, but I knew that this confrontation could not be avoided. Karen had escalated from being a neighborhood bully to a legal threat, and Emily's safety, dignity, and well-being depended on me standing firm. I reminded myself that we were fighting for more than just ourselves. We were standing against a pattern of abuse that could affect anyone vulnerable in the community. By the end of that period, it was clear. Karen's lawsuit was an attack, but it was also an opportunity. An opportunity to expose her abusive tactics, to defend Emily, and to reclaim control over our lives. We were ready. We had evidence, witnesses, and, most importantly, the truth. And while the battle ahead promised tension, heartache, and legal drama, I knew we had something Karen couldn't intimidate: courage, love, and unwavering determination. The courtroom was tense the morning the trial finally began. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting shadows that made the room feel both austere and oppressive. Families and neighbors had gathered, some curious, some quietly supportive, and a few clearly rooting for Karen, the infamous HOA enforcer whose name had long been whispered with equal parts fear and frustration. For Emily and me, walking into that room was like stepping onto a battlefield. The stakes were enormous. Karen's power, her reputation, and her attempt to intimidate us would all collide in this one space. Karen arrived early, as expected, her posture rigid, her expression carefully neutral. She wore her usual crisp blazer, her hair perfectly styled, and carried a leather-bound notebook that seemed to reinforce her aura of authority. But beneath that polished exterior, I could detect cracks, subtle shifts in her confidence, fleeting glances toward the door as if questioning whether she had fully measured the storm she had unleashed. She had built her persona around control, intimidation, and fear, but now she faced the reality that she could be held accountable. Our attorney began the proceedings with a calm yet commanding statement. "Your Honor," they said, their voice carrying across the silent room, "this case is about more than a minor HOA disagreement. It is about the safety of a vulnerable child, the misuse of authority, and the principle that no individual, regardless of title or position, can inflict harm without consequence." The judge nodded, his expression attentive but neutral, signaling the importance of impartiality. The first piece of evidence was our video recording, the footage of Karen striking Emily with her clipboard. As the video played, the room fell silent. Emily's small arm recoiled under the force of the strike, and her startled cry echoed, raw and heart-wrenching. I watched Karen's face, expecting some shred of remorse, but saw only panic and anger. Her carefully constructed narrative, the claim that she was the victim and I was the aggressor, was unraveling before our eyes. The jury's attention was fixed on the screen, absorbing every detail, every sound, and every emotional nuance of the incident. Karen attempted to defend herself. She insisted that Emily had somehow provoked her, that she had been enforcing HOA rules, and that I had manipulated the situation to damage her reputation. Her arguments were rehearsed, mechanical, and detached from reality. Our attorney countered each point methodically, presenting neighbor statements, medical reports from Emily's pediatrician, and evidence of Karen's repeated history of harassment. Every piece of documentation, every testimony chipped away at her credibility. When it was my turn to testify, I felt the weight of every moment leading up to this point pressing on me. But I spoke clearly and with resolve, recounting the night on our porch in detail. I described Karen's aggression, the fear in Emily's eyes, and the pain of witnessing my child being hurt by someone who should have been bound by rules, regulations, and basic human decency. "She didn't just strike Emily," I said, my voice steady, "she attacked our sense of safety and our home. She exploited her position to intimidate and harm, and she must be held accountable." Then came Emily's testimony. I held her hand tightly, guiding her gently to the witness stand. Her voice trembled at first, but she gathered strength as she spoke. "She hurt me," Emily said simply, her words weighted with honesty. "I was scared. I didn't do anything wrong." The courtroom went quiet, the raw truth resonating far more powerfully than any legal argument or document could. Karen shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for the child she had harmed to confront her directly. The turning point came when our attorney presented further evidence, multiple records of Karen's previous bullying behavior, including fines for minor infractions, aggressive confrontations, and threatening letters to other residents. Patterns emerged clearly. Karen's use of her HOA authority was not sporadic but systematic. It became evident that her lawsuit against us was less about any actual harm to her reputation and more about silencing a family she had wronged. Karen's demeanor began to crack. She had relied on intimidation, manipulation, and legal posturing to dominate the narrative, but the truth was undeniable. Even her own witnesses began to falter. One neighbor, initially called to defend Karen, admitted under questioning that they had personally witnessed her strike Emily. The revelation was like a bomb going off in the courtroom. Gasps filled the room, and Karen's composure faltered further. Her credibility, carefully built over years of neighborhood dominance, was crumbling. As the trial progressed, our attorney expertly dismantled Karen's arguments. Each claim of emotional distress on her part was juxtaposed against documented evidence of Emily's trauma and the intimidation of other residents. Each assertion that I had defamed Karen was countered with proof that my complaints were truthful, fact-based, and made in the pursuit of safety for my child. The narrative was shifting decisively. We were no longer just defending ourselves. We were exposing Karen for what she truly was. A bully with unchecked power, forced into the open by her own actions. Throughout the proceedings, I watched Emily with a mix of pride and heartbreak. Despite her disability and the fear she had endured, she faced the courtroom with courage. Every word she spoke reinforced our case, humanizing the abstract concept of abuse and holding Karen accountable in the most undeniable way possible. She was small in stature but monumental in impact. The jury's reactions were subtle but telling. Nods, intense focus, and furrowed brows as they absorbed the story of a mother and daughter confronting injustice. The final phase of the trial involved closing arguments. Our attorney's words were precise and powerful, emphasizing the clear evidence of Karen's aggression, her abuse of power, and the profound impact on Emily's life. This case is not merely about fines or HOA rules, they said. It is about accountability, protection, and the courage to stand against intimidation. Karen attempted to turn the tables, to make the victim the villain. But today, justice will reflect the truth. Karen's attorney tried a last-ditch effort to cast doubt, but it was ineffective. The video, witness testimonies, medical records, and the pattern of her prior behavior all pointed unmistakably in one direction. Karen's strategy of intimidation had failed. By the end of the day, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. We had survived the first stage of the legal battle, and the momentum was clearly in our favor. Karen's aura of invincibility had been shattered, and her attempts to manipulate the system were exposed. It was no longer just a fight for compensation or legal vindication. It was a triumph of truth over intimidation, courage over fear, and love over cruelty. Walking out of the courtroom that evening, I felt a cautious optimism. Emily's hand was in mine, and for the first time since that night on the porch, I felt a flicker of hope that we could truly reclaim our sense of safety, dignity, and peace. Karen's actions had sparked this battle, but our resilience, evidence, and courage were now the driving force. The next step, the verdict, would determine the ultimate outcome, but one thing was already clear. We had turned the tables, and the fight was no longer one-sided. The day of the verdict arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable. Weeks of preparation, testimony, and emotional upheaval had led to this moment. Emily and I walked in together, her small hand in mine, each step a mix of anticipation, exhaustion, and guarded hope. Our lawyer whispered words of reassurance, but even with preparation, nothing could fully shield us from the weight of the outcome. Karen sat across the room, her posture rigid, her sharp blazer and polished appearance doing nothing to mask the unease in her eyes. Her confident aura, once so intimidating, had been visibly eroded by the relentless presentation of evidence and testimony. The room fell silent as the judge called the case. The jury had been deliberating for hours, carefully reviewing the evidence, the video of Karen striking Emily, eyewitness accounts, medical documentation, and a trail of her pattern of intimidation and abuse throughout the neighborhood. Every piece of proof painted a clear picture. Karen's behavior was deliberate, aggressive, and entirely unprovoked. She had tried to turn the tables, but the facts could not be ignored. The 4% of the jury stood and began to read the verdict. My heart pounded in my chest. Emily squeezed my hand, her eyes wide and focused. The words that followed were like a thunderclap of relief. On the count of assault, the jury finds the defendant, Karen, last name, liable. On the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress, the jury also finds the defendant liable. Damages are to be awarded to the plaintiffs, my name, and Emily, last name, as determined by the court. I felt a wave of emotion crash over me, relief, vindication, and a sense of justice that I had feared might never come. Emily's face broke into a cautious, trembling smile. She had witnessed her own truth recognized in the courtroom, and for the first time since that night on the porch, she could breathe without the lingering shadow of fear. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her attempt to maintain composure failing utterly. The courtroom was filled with murmurs and whispers, neighbors exchanging looks of disbelief. For once, the bully had been held accountable. The judge continued, detailing the consequences. Karen would be required to pay damages to cover Emily's medical expenses, emotional trauma, and legal fees incurred by our family. Additionally, she was ordered to attend mandatory anger management and sensitivity training, a ruling designed to prevent her from continuing her pattern of intimidation. It was not just a legal victory, it was a formal recognition that her abuse of authority could not stand unchallenged. Walking out of the courthouse with Emily, I felt a profound mixture of exhaustion and triumph. The sun was shining, and the neighborhood outside seemed both the same and entirely transformed. The fences, lawns, and streets had not changed, but the sense of control Karen had wielded over residents had been irreparably broken. I could feel the subtle shift in the air. Neighbors who had once hesitated to speak now approached us with quiet congratulations, sharing their own stories of harassment and relief that someone had finally confronted Karen. In the days and weeks following the verdict, Emily and I focused on healing. Therapy sessions became a sanctuary, a place where she could process the fear and trauma she had endured. We spent hours talking, drawing, and laughing together, rebuilding the sense of safety that Karen had tried so brutally to destroy. For me, the experience reinforced a powerful truth: love and determination can overcome fear and intimidation, even when the odds seem stacked against you. The impact of our case extended beyond our household. Neighbors inspired by our courage began to challenge other unfair HOA practices, demanding transparency and accountability. Karen's reputation as an untouchable authority figure was shattered. Emails and letters from residents poured in, expressing relief that the cycle of intimidation had been confronted. Our story became a beacon for those who had felt powerless in the face of abuse, showing that even the most fearsome bullies can be held accountable. Reflecting on that fateful night, the porch, the clipboard, Emily's frightened cry, I realized how far we had come. The fear that once seemed insurmountable had been transformed into empowerment. Emily learned that her voice mattered, that her experiences were valid, and that standing up to injustice, no matter how daunting, could lead to change. And I learned that a parent's love is both a shield and a weapon, capable of confronting cruelty head-on and defending the vulnerable with unwavering resolve. Karen may have tried to manipulate the system, to intimidate us, and to redefine the narrative, but in the end, truth and courage prevailed. She had attempted to turn the tables, to cast herself as the victim while vilifying us, but the evidence, the testimonies, and the undeniable facts spoke louder than her manipulations. Justice was not just about the legal outcome. It was about reclaiming our dignity, our safety, and our right to live without fear in our own home. In the quiet moments after the trial, I often look at Emily and marvel at her resilience. She continues to thrive, her creativity flourishing, her laughter returning, and her confidence growing. Every day is a reminder that the strength of one determined family can overcome intimidation, that the courage to stand up for what is right is more powerful than any position of authority wielded without conscience. Our neighborhood, too, has changed. Residents are more aware, more vocal, and more protective of each other. Karen's actions can no longer terrorize the community. They have been exposed, addressed, and corrected. And while scars remain, physical, emotional, and psychological, they serve as a testament to the battle we fought, the truths we upheld, and the resilience we discovered in the process. The ordeal was terrifying, exhausting, and emotionally draining, but it ultimately reaffirmed a profound lesson. Bullies, no matter how powerful they seem, cannot prevail when faced with truth, evidence, and unwavering love. Karen may have tried to rewrite reality and turn the tables on us, but in the end, the only victory that truly mattered was ours, the protection, recognition, and justice for Emily, and the restoration of safety and dignity in the home we cherish.